Oh, it's on.
What it do is back to alive with Kamal and Daniel. I'm here in Birmingham. What is good, Kamal?
You know what's good, man. We back at it with another one. Back at it like crack addicts. Let's get it. So, I was watching the fight the other day on ESPN, and they put out the boxing heavyweight rankings. And I sent it to you. What do you what's your opinion on it?
My opinion on it. So it had Tyson Fury number one, Deontay Wilder. Tyson Fury number one. It had AJ Anthony Joshua number two. Number three, it had Andy the Destroyer Ruiz. And number four, it had Deontay Bronze Bomber Wilder.
Hold on, let me correct you. I just pulled it up. It was 3 was Wilder and 4 was Ruiz.
Four was Wilder, 3 was Ruiz. Who was number 5?
Povetkin.
Got you.
Yeah. So what's your topic? What's your take on that?
My take is that I think is correct as it can get. And and this video is about right now the rankings, the heavyweight rankings, and what we're also going to do is to transition to talk about the championship belts, in and of themselves, the championship belts. And we're going to start off talking about the rankings and segue into it. If you want to skip ahead and see why the belts are the way they are and the boxing belts explained, we'll leave in the comment section where to skip into in the video. But my in the description, my thoughts is that I think it's as correct as the heavyweight rankings can be, because Tyson Fury is still unbeaten. However, Anthony Joshua has been beaten. Deontay Wilder has been beaten. Even though Anthony Joshua regained his belt, he still had that loss. And Tyson Fury's resume in the capacity of he is still the guy who beat the guy who beat the guy. He is the lineal world heavyweight champion, on top of beating an incredible fighter in Deontay Wilder, incredible in the aspects of what he has done, defending that championship belt against so many people, so many times. And so I feel like it is as correct as it can be. Don't get me wrong, I think Anthony Joshua is probably one of the best. He's my favorite heavyweight out of the top 3. He's my favorite heavyweight. But should he be second? Is it right that he's second? I think it's right. He did lose a fight, and Tyson Fury hasn't lost a fight. And Tyson Fury beat Vladimir Klitschko, and Tyson Fury beat Deontay Wilder. And so I feel like, and going into number 3, Wilder, I think that's also correct, and you can make an argument that's also correct. And I don't see any anomalies. I would say number 5. Oh, then again, he beat. I was gonna say Gillian White, but then
did he beat him? Binky in a blanket. I kind of disagree with Wilder, not Wilder, with Anthony Joshua being 2 and Fury being 1. I think Anthony Joshua should be 1. And I think with Tyson Fury not fighting from those 2 years or a year and a half or however long it was, kind of hurts him, because he could have had fought Anthony Joshua by that time. He could have already had fought Wilder at that time, and a lot of the other top heavyweights. I would take Anthony Joshua number 1 over Fury for the simple fact that when you look at the top 10 list, Anthony Joshua has fought and beat 4 of the top 10 fighters on the top 10 list. Even though he did lose to Andy Ruiz Jr., but then he regained that back. But I just think when you look at Anthony Joshua's body of work compared to Tyson Fury's body of work, it sticks out to me more than just Tyson Fury being undefeated.
Yeah.
Because
you're right.
I was kind of a little between 3 and 4. Like I'm okay with everything else. With a little bit was, I think Ortiz should have been a little bit higher than 8, but then the 2 losses to Wilder hurts him. But
Yeah.
like 3 and 4, I was like a little conflicted because I'm like, okay, just like I said earlier, which Wilder at 3 is good because his
Mm.
body of work is better than Andy
I,
Ruiz, though Andy Ruiz beat
yeah.
Anthony Joshua. So I was
Yeah.
kind of conflicted between 3 and 4, but then when I just sat back and thought about it, 3 and 4 is right. Um,
Yeah.
with them having Andy Ruiz that high though, I think it's just off of that win that he had off of AJ because I look at Parker's work, like some of the other guys, their work is a little bit better than his and have fought some known heavyweights over than Andy Ruiz.
Yeah.
But I'm just 1 and 2 though. I think needs to flip.
But I feel like it's just a loss. I feel like as great as his body of work was, which is true, as Tyson Fury's best wins are against his best wins are against Deontay Wilder, Vladimir Klitschko, and Derek Chisora is also notable in there if you throw him in the mix. And I feel like the biggest catalyst is that loss. At the end of the day, we're talking about winning. And at this time, and still the lineal champion, and beat Klitschko at the time he beat Klitschko. I feel like Tyson Fury, in all respect to him, he is the number one guy statistically. He's number one guy until he beats AJ, or until AJ beats him, until he has claimed victory over both AJ and Wilder. He's only the best guy statistically. But yeah.
I mean, but to me, like them losses, I think people take those losses a little bit. But then again, he got knocked out. Then again, he got knocked out. I mean, Jesus. I mean, you didn't even want to return my calls for like 2 weeks after that. So you know what? Yeah, yeah, yeah. You. What do you mean? Yeah, you. Yeah, you. When Andy Ruiz beat the brakes off AJ, you ain't even want to. You quiet as a church mouse.
I struggled to get out of bed that morning, and
It's all right, man. It's all right, man. But
no, it happens, and yeah. But you want to know the importance of the lineal championship.
go ahead.
The lineal championship goes back to John L. Sullivan. And as we talk about the best, AJ did beat Vladimir Klitschko, but Tyson Fury also beat Vladimir Klitschko before him. So right now, in retroactively speaking, the lineal champ, you can be the WBA, WBC, WBO, IBF world champion. If you are not the lineal champion, seldom in history will you be recognized as the world's heavyweight champion. And right now, we're about to get onto the championship belts. Is there anything that you want to say about the heavyweight rankings and the current state of the heavyweight rankings?
Nah, I don't, but I do have a question. Like I've always heard the lineal championship only in heavyweight.
Oh no, it's there. It's present everywhere. It's present everywhere on all in
Yeah,
every. I
but
think
I haven't heard it in any other weight class
it's probably.
recently, especially recently.
Mm.
So I mean, I don't even know if that's another topic for us to discuss, but I mean I haven't really heard, like I've heard undisputed, and the last undisputed that we had was
Yeah,
was Usyk, and before that was Terrence Crawford.
Bud Crawford, yeah, who was lineal champion in that weight class. And so basically the reason why, and I'll tell you, it's actually a good point you say. And so the reason why the lineal is known more at heavyweight is because seldom does it leave, because in for example, I think Canelo Alvarez is the current lineal middleweight champion. He beat the guy who was the former lineal middleweight champion, who was Miguel Cotto, who beat the guy who was, I think, Sergio Martinez. And so, and Sergio Martinez, you're going back into early tens, late 2000s, and in welterweight, I know Floyd Mayweather was the lineal champion. You haven't had a lineal champion since Floyd, because the lineal champion can be awarded if the champion is inactive or has left. The number one and the number two fighters have to fight each other. to become the lineal champion. And so the reason why you rarely hear it in those weight classes, because everyone is moving up weight. Everyone is coming up and going down, and no one is there long enough for it to be solidified. And so what do I mean by that? When you have, let's say, take any weight class, lightweight division.
No, I mean, let's say, well, I don't mean to cut you off, but let's take Adrian Broner, for instance. You know, he was dominant at 130. He was dominant at 135. Then jumped up to 147. He didn't stay in 130 or 135 long enough to even. I think he unified at 130. I'm not sure.
Didn't unify any weight class. He was a single world champion in all 4 of those weight classes.
Okay, so but he kept moving around. Like, so I mean, you make a good point, because after he went to 147, then he came back down to 140, then he went back up to 147, and then he was doing a couple catch weight fights in the middle, meaning he wasn't fighting at 140 or 147. He was doing like 143, 144, things like that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he didn't stay in those divisions long enough to become lineal, which I think if he would have stayed in at least at 135, he would have been a lineal champion. He would have been undisputed.
You think so? At lightweight?
At the time he was fighting at lightweight, I don't think at the time he was fighting. Not now, but when he was fighting, I don't think there was nobody at 135 that could have messed with Adrian Broner. At the time he was at 135.
Exactly. You're right. And so with these fighters, especially from 126 to about 147, that's why Canelo's the lineal champion, because he hasn't really gone up to, in a capacity where where he doesn't want to fight at middleweight anymore. He goes up, but still makes middleweight his home in one way or another. But I think the last lineal champion you had was Floyd Mayweather. I think the next time you have a lineal champion is when number 1 faces number 2, which could end up being Errol Spence Jr. against Terrence Bud Crawford. And so that's why you see it at heavyweight, because, if you have a middleweight, if you have a lightweight, let's say, who doesn't fight number 1, let's say who's number 1, who doesn't fight number 2, that lineal championship won't get awarded. And, getting that number 1 versus number 2 fight is very, very rare. So you can imagine how you won't be able to see it a lot of the times in other ways, except from the heavyweight division. But the lineal championship basically dates back to when the Ring magazine crowned its champions. The World Championship Boxing, the World Championships, they date back to the first World Heavyweight champion was John L. Sullivan, just before the turn of the 20th century. And so local state athletic commissions would come together, would band together to nominate and then hold the fights, that stage the fights, and the winner of all these fights will be recognized as that champion, and which would lead into the biggest commission at that time, which was the New York State Athletic Commission, organizing who was the world's champion. And then it became, going into the 20s, in 1921, in the early 20s, the National Boxing Association was formed, and it had its world championship merged with the New York State Athletic Commission's world championship. That was, at that time, the unified championship. If you were the NBA champion and the New York State Athletic Commission champion, you were the world's champion. And then a reporter named Nat Fletcher decided to create a magazine which would be renowned in championship boxing. And he was known as the Bible of boxing, a magazine called Ring Magazine in the 20s. And that magazine is legendary to this day. And that magazine started awarding a championship belt, which was red, white, and blue, and had a gold plate. And that belt for the rest of the century was known as, whoever held that belt was the world's champion. They didn't award the belt on a governing body basis, but if you beat the man who beat the man, you were regarded that world champion. And so as the NBA became the belt, the NBA became the championship, and the Ring magazine became the belt. And so you were the world's champion. And so it became like that until the early 60s, to avoid any type of confusion with a bludgeoning basketball league called the National Basketball Association, the NBA, and more demonstrate its worldwide appeal. The National Boxing Association renamed itself the World Boxing Association, the belt that we know now as the black belt. However, going in
WBA belt,
the WBA belt, which is legend, which is the oldest. Now, if we're talking back to the NBA, which is the oldest, and now in the WBA, a group of people, a group of executives and members of the World Boxing Association decided to leave, and that group was headed up by a an officiator named Jose Suleiman. And Jose Suleiman took his group, went to Mexico to decide to govern championship boxing for himself and create his own governing body. And that belt and that governing body became known as the World Boxing Council, the WBC.
Yeah, and that was in 1963 when the WBC was created, and the WBA was in 1962.
Mm-hmm.
And before the WBA was the NBA, which was 1921. For those, so you guys can keep track of what's going on. Now with the WBC and the WBA, my gripe with them is that we got a lot of belts as it is, and the fact that the WBA has the super champion, and they have the regular champion, and then they have the interim champion.
Mm-hmm.
As so with the WBC, you have the franchise, then you have the super champion, you have the silver champion, and you have the diamond champion.
Mm-hmm.
Which to a lot of people who are not just casual boxing fans, are not like hardcore fans like you and I are, even though we're still learning. You learn every day. That could be very confusing.
It can be very, you're right, it can be very confusing. And so to go back into it, let's say, so in going past the 1960s, WBC has just been created, and now those two are the main world championship belts. What you now have in the late 70s is an organization known as the United States Boxing Association, the USBA, which starts awarding its regional United States championship belts. And with the success that they're having in 1983, they see an opportunity to go global and decide to create their own version of the world's championship, which they call the International Boxing Federation. And that is the IBF, which was headed by a guy named John Holmes. I believe I might be mistaken. John Holmes became the head of that the IBF, and the IBF now awarded its own world championship, the red belt. And then that was in 1983, and then obviously 5 years later, the fourth and final major organization came in the World Boxing Organization in 1988. Boxing belts make money through boxing governing boards make money through sanctioning fights. And so when a fighter fights and they're sanctioned by that, and they hold that belt, or they win that belt, they're defending that belt, they pay 3% of their purse. So the more people sanctioned, the more 3% fees are being generated. And the get more people to be sanctioned is to create more belts.
Yeah, but it's confusing. Like I'm be honest with you. I went to it was Gary Russell versus King Tut, and on the undercard it was Guillermo Rigondeaux,
Mm-hmm.
Cuban fighter.
Mm-hmm.
Cuban fighter. But anyway, I was ecstatic because I was like, all right, yeah, this is for a belt. But then when you look it up, it was for the regular belt, the regular WBA belt. It wasn't for the super belt, and that kind of like put a little damper on my on my parade. But like sometimes when you have the regular and the super, sometimes especially with the WBA, that enlines you to have a fight with the super champion.
Mm-hmm.
And that goes for the same thing for the silver and the diamond. The one
Yeah.
thing and that's with the WBC. Now, the one thing I don't really like with the WBC is that franchise.
No, I don't like it. I don't like it. It doesn't do the sport any favors, and it's used kind of as a vehicle to facilitate fights not happening. You know what I'm saying? So if a WBC is a champion and there's a number one contender, but the champion is with a so-and-so promoter and the contenders with so-and-so promoter, and both promoters don't really see eye to eye and want to keep their fighters doing their own separate thing, and the WBC, keep in mind, the WBC franchise champion and the WBC champion gets each of them pay 3% fees to the WBC. So it's also in the WBCs. So if the champion and the franchise champion, if they make $1 million each in purses in separate fights, that's 3% on That's $30,000. That's $60,000 to the WBC, as opposed to having it be one champion making $1 million and it just be $30,000. You know, so there's a monetary incentive for the World Boxing Council, but it's also a way to appease the promoters and to facilitate the fights not happening. You know, and it's something that, you know, it's something that I don't like. The super belts. And the WBA Super, the WBA Regular, and the WBA Interim, those three belts, as boxing, obviously, as these four belts emerged, and championship boxing was split into about from 8 divisions until about 14 divisions, a lot of the fighters were very busy and preoccupied with other things. So, and now me, as the WBA champion, instead of focusing on my up-and-coming opponent, I might focus on the IBF champion. So what does that mean for my up-and-coming opponent? What's he going to do? Just stay there and do nothing? He still wants to have a championship belt. So what happens, is I get elevated to the super champion, and then the guy below me gets the regular championship belt. So for all people concerned, I'm still the real champion, but he's just a regular champion. And then on top of that, with the same thing happening, there's now the interim champion, you know. And so as championship boxing gets bigger and more out, and a lot of the attention of the fighters are switched now, each fighter, they want their own piece of the championship belt, you know. And keep in mind, it's also in the WBA's favor and incentive to create these championship belts. And so they create the interim belt to appease this guy, collect a fee. They create the regular belt to appease that guy, get a fee, and they create the super belt to appease that guy and still collect a fee. And so, yeah.
It's too many belts, man. There's more belts than the Belt Parkway in Brooklyn. It's too many belts.
Being 4 belts, you know, and I like the interim belt, you know, and
Even,
I feel like super belt, the WBA should have done what the WBO does. That when the WBO hands out a super belt, it is an honorary belt. You know, it isn't a defendable championship belt.
me personally, I like the IBF.
I like the IBF, and I like Daryl Peoples, man. I respected Daryl Peoples. Before Daryl Peoples came around, you know, his uncle was not the best governor. His uncle had an appeasement for cash, and his uncle was doing business with Don King, and not just Don King, but other who weren't operating in the best way, and let's just say that. And so what Daryl Peoples has done with the International Boxing Federation is truly great. But tell us about it, Ken. Tell us, you know, about the IBF and how they operate.
Man, I like the IBF for the simple fact that it's only one belt. So it's one true champion. And I also like the fact that there's a 10-pound weight rehydration clause. So let's just say you're fighting at middleweight, which is 160 pounds. On a, you know, you weigh in, you make it 160 or under, but then the day of the fight, you cannot rehydrate past 170 pounds. And I like that. Because I've seen in fights where a guy would make weight and then rehydrate 15, 30 pounds overnight, 15 to 20 pounds overnight. And I mean, yeah, that's the advantage for the fighter, but that's not what I signed up to fight. I signed up to fight somebody that's weighing the same as me.
Middleweight, you know, and you fighting a light heavyweight, you know. It's not ideal, you know. It's absolutely not ideal, and it's a good rule, though. It's a very good rule by the IBF. You know what I'm saying? In my opinion, right now, the IBF is the #1 belt, and it's the #1 governing body in terms of how they operate, the rules they implement, and the deliberation to have only one belt. They don't have a gold belt. They don't have an interim belt unless the current champion is actually busy, you know, or maybe even injured. You know, I don't think it's even busy, but if the current champion is injured or not able to operate, maybe, but seldom do you see. I don't think I can name the last interim champion, you know, but yeah, I do like how they operate. Very much.
I mean, but if you go into the boxing world, a lot of people favor that WBC belt, man. A lot of people would say that the WBC is like the #1 belt out of the 4 belts.
Yeah, no, absolutely. In my opinion, what would I say? No, if I was a fighter and I could only win one belt, I would say I would only win the WBA belt simply because of that legacy. You know, it's almost next year. It's going to be around for a century. You know, since 1921. And so, if I could only win one belt, it would be the WBA for for that legacy view. But the WBC belt is a very legendary belt. You know, you have seen it around the waist of some of boxing's finest. You know, Sugar Ray Leonard, Muhammad Ali had it, Larry Holmes had it. You know, Floyd Mayweather. I think that most of the world championships that Floyd Mayweather won were WBC variations of that world championship belt. So, you know, from when he was featherweight till and he didn't bother unify. He didn't get the red until he was a welterweight, but after beating Pacquiao. But yeah, you know, he is WBC champion. He made the WBC very big.
Yeah, I think that's why the WBC is so popular because Floyd, Floyd has changed the boxing game, and with him changing the boxing game, that's like Michael Jordan. You know, when Michael Jordan made baggy shorts cool to wear instead of wearing them tight shorts.
Yep.
that's what Floyd did. He made that WBC, more appealing to everybody because he won it in every weight class that he's fought in. But I think even Mike Tyson had the WBC too. I mean, a lot of legendary fighters had the WBC belt.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, Tyson had the WBC. Tyson, that was the first belt that he won. He won the WBC championship by beating Trevor Berbick in November of 1986. In November of 1986, and in Vegas, you know, and so that belt, especially because it was the only one, he ended up winning all three, the WBA, C, and IBF, but when he beat Trevor Berbick, that was the only belt that was around his waist before he won the other two. And so when those pictures are taken, that green belt has massive exposure. You know what I'm saying? He doesn't have to share that exposure with the other two belts. So it's become very, very famous. And
then on top of that, the WBC, like the color, it's a green belt. It stands out, more than the other belts.
Yeah. No, yeah, that's 100% true. Especially that nice gold plate in the middle. It's good. It's a nice belt, and in my opinion, I think it's good for me. The straps are too thin, so if I tie it around my waist, I think I prefer the IBF. Or now maybe the WBA. But yeah,
I don't know, man. I don't know.
And they operate. You know, that's why there's many other variations despite on world level. You know, they've got the international belt, which I don't mind. I don't mind gold belts, international belts, silver belts, because I feel like that's something for prospects and contenders to aspire up to. You know what I'm saying? If they're not able to win, if they go through their career and not able to win the world's crown, at least they can say, you know, I won the WBC silver belt, or at least I had something. You know, I was able to carve out my own piece of the boxing championship pool, you know, and so it's something that's great for young fighters and prospects and contenders to aspire to. The international championship, the intercontinental championship, the European championship. And so, yeah, that's why I don't have a problem. The only part for me that I have a problem is when the when the World Boxing Association and the World Boxing Council decides to split the world championships into a franchise champion, and then have a super champion, and then have the world champion, and have the interim champion and regular champion. It just, you know, when it gets to that level, I don't like it.
I don't know. I kind of wish it was just one belt for one division.
I don't. What do you mean? Like no, like as in no four belts?
No, one belt.
No.
Because think about it.
I even said this to Rock. I said this to him. I said, the four belt is good because you have, especially in a sport as big and as wide as boxing, you know, going worldwide, you know, you cannot be fit. You know, there's so many great fighters out there, and you know, a lot of them will be waiting their turn for such a long time. But not even that though. I feel like it's great for I don't want to say business and it's great for business, but it's great for a story. You know what I'm saying? It's something to aspire to, because in the National Football League, you have the Eastern Conference, you have the Southern Conference, the Western Conference, and the Northern Conference, and then you have the AFL, and then you have the AFC. And then you have the NFC. And what it comes together to create the Super Bowl. You know, you have the WBA, you have the World Championship, and then you have the Unified Championship, and then you have the Super Championship, and then you have the Fourth Championship, which becomes the Undisputed Championship. It creates great story, you know, and it creates great plans. That's why you have, you know, matches like this. It just makes the thing so much harder. You know, now we have AJ and Fury. Before we just had, before we just had AJ, Wilder, um, Parker, and Vlad, and and the WBA was vacant, but now you have AJ, the IBF, the WBA, the WBO, and now Fury. Now it's got the WBC, and now the story culminates in one big fight. I think that the fact that there's 4 belts is really, really good and really helps the sport. I feel like, in my opinion, that helps the sport more, than it would be if it wasn't there.
I think it helps the sport, but it hurts the sport because we don't get to see that. Like right now, you have Earl Spence, who is the IBF and the WBC champion, right? Then you have Pacquiao, who's the WBA champion, and you have Terrence Crawford, who's the WO champion in the welterweight division. We're more likely to see Pacquiao versus Earl Spence for that unified for the 3 belts.
Mm-hmm.
But how likely are we going to see the winner of that fight, if it does come to fruition, happen? If Earl Spence and Pacquiao, how likely are we going to see the winner of that fight versus Crawford?
Now you're absolutely right. You're very right, and I think it's just one of those. I think it's good. It's definitely going to happen. You know what I'm saying? The boss of all bosses. The Godfather, Al Heyman. He's not an imbecile. He's the head of the Heyman, and he's not an imbecile. Happen, but I feel like he's also trying to lay out the groundwork. Like I said, storytelling. Eventually this is going to culminate into that fight happening, and so yeah, he's not going to try and have Errol Spence go his entire career without fighting Terrence Crawford. Errol Spence won't stand for that either, and so it will happen. I definitely solemnly believe we're just going to get the Pacquiao fight. The Pacquiao fight done first, and then we're gonna see what's going on with Uncle Bob Arum, the old man, and Todd DeBuck. Yeah, we're gonna get it cracking. Believe me, that fight will happen.
Yeah, it needs to happen. Like, even at the middleweight division, and that needs a lot of the unifications needs to start happening and happen soon, because I love the sport of boxing. I just don't like some of the politics in the boxing, and I think that's what's starting to kill the sport.
It's incredibly annoying because it's something that I love very much. Boxing is, I feel like when done right, it can, if I can, it can be one of the biggest things on this earth. You know what I'm saying? Boxing used to be that, I was about to say that N-word, but back in, the 40s, 30s, and 20s, even 50s and 70s, boxing was that sport. You know what I'm saying? It was that, it was the biggest sport, especially in North America, but one of the biggest sports in the world. And just the mismanagement. And I feel like it's one of those whose growth was created so much schism because so many people got involved. And when they went involved, it's kind of like, they tore it apart, you know what I'm saying? So now every promoter wants a little piece for themselves, and so, yeah, but we'll see, you know what I'm saying? We'll see how it goes forward. And, but it's just, in my opinion, the worst thing that probably has happened in this past decade was the franchise championship.
That was the worst.
It actually, you know what I'm saying? My vibe, my tone, I'm not sure if you've seen it, but when we started speaking about that earlier, it's a very disappointing thing, I
don't even want to get into it. I don't even want to get into it.
For me, seeing that, it's like seeing someone with emphysema go smoke, go outside to take a smoke. Seeing someone with emphysema dying, told you've got this, you got lung cancer, go out and go leave work to take a smoke break. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, hey,
yeah.
So yeah, but but we'll see how. And yeah.
Yo, go ahead, man, and close this out, D.
That was the boxing belts explained, the 4 of them, where they came from and how long ago they came, and also one of the reasons, it's been one of the reasons why there are so many belts. And in terms of the heavyweight rankings right now, I think they're as great as they can be on ESPN. And I'm not sure what the ring has, but we'll have a look. In my opinion, the ring is as good as it gets in championship boxing. So yeah. So thanks for joining us, everyone, man. I'm DMT. Come on.
Cam over here, baby. Yo, please like, subscribe, comment on the videos, and we'll see y'all with another one.